So, if you've been watching any of the news out there recently about Canada's political scene, with Trudeau announcing his intention to resign and possibly a non-confidence vote coming down pretty quickly, it's clear that we're headed towards an election sometime soon. Now, the candidate who's most likely to become the next prime minister, according to a bunch of surveys and just online in general, is probably going to be Mr. Pierre, who's representing the Conservative Party. And this has sparked a lot of discussion around what the next 10 years maybe would look like under a conservative leadership versus the liberal socialist leadership that we've had in the last 10 years with Trudeau. So let's talk about 7 key differences that would happen in case Pierre comes into power and how that might look for us as Canadians. So the first thing we can really expect if a conservative government into power in 2025 is a renewed focus on fiscal responsibility. So what does that mean? That means that they're probably going to do a few things. One, they're going to take a look at the government spending over the past few years and cut out any unnecessary spending, like the $54 million Arrive Can Act, which basically became obsolete in just a few years. They're also going to probably look at social programs that they aren't seeing any ROI or anything like that, and probably cut spending or just cut it out altogether. They're also going to probably have a bit more transparency around government spending and not just try to hide the fact that Trudeau may be paying his mom $250,000 for speaking at events. There's also probably going to be a few changes in taxes in general. Nothing has really been discussed yet in terms of specifics, but we can expect just from the history of conservative governments in general, they have less taxes on small businesses. They will probably be renegotiating tariffs, maybe the tariffs that we've been hearing about from Canada to the US and back and forth, probably have a new negotiation regarding that. So we can expect less fees and things like that for international business. Less taxes, never a bad thing. We know that Pierre has been talking to axe the tax, which basically means to get rid of the carbon tax. So we can expect maybe a reduction in some taxes, but there's always a possibility for increasing taxes in specific segments. Another thing that the conservative government has really focused on is the debt management. They're probably going to be taking a hard look at where they're in debt and paying that off sooner. I recently saw a statistic that the Canadian government is paying more in interest on their debt right now than they're actually paying towards the debt itself, which that's something that normally consumers with very little financial education do, but it's the government. So that raises a few questions. So now on to number 2. The second thing that Pierre is really focusing on in his campaign is the housing crisis. It's a very complex issue, and there's a lot of things that need to be done to solve the crisis, but he's really focused on a few things that might help to reverse or at least bring down the pricing to make it at least a bit more affordable. So the way that Pierre has talked about doing this, the biggest thing is cutting the red tape. So this means making it super easy for investment firms and companies to go in and actually build these houses. Right now, it's taking several years just to get the approvals to start building a house or an apartment building. And that's really putting a strain on Canada because less housing, more people coming in, and a bigger population means housing crisis. That's one of the main reasons why we are where we are now. Of course, it's a very complicated issue, and there are some things that Pierre hasn't really touched on, but I won't get too much into it in this video. Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments. Now, the third thing that the conservative government has touched on and is making promises towards is strengthening the economy. So this is done in a few ways. The first thing that the conservative government is really pushing towards is building energy infrastructure in Canada and really leveraging the possibility for electricity and water and really leveraging the natural resources that Canada has to offer. So this is going to make Canada a bit more competitive in terms of, the energy that we can produce and sell to other countries, not just the United States, which has been our biggest export so far. The conservative government has talked about selling the energy and the natural gas that Canada produces to other countries and to other continents such as Europe and Asia, who will pay premiums for the resources that we have versus the United States, which really tries to get that price down. Another way that Conservative government has promised to help Canada grow is really supporting small businesses. This is typical with Conservative governments. They usually have a very strong focus on developing the economy. Some people argue that it's negative because it's more short-sighted versus long-term, but I think right now, personally, I think Canada kind of needs a bit of a kickstart in the economy. So this could be a good thing for a lot of small businesses who are really struggling with high taxes in certain income categories, or the tariffs that might be in place and other things like that. So deregulation does help small businesses. Yes, it does help huge corporations too, but helping small businesses is also a side of the coin and an important one to consider. And number 4, the fourth way that the Conservative government has promised to make changes about is actually the immigration system in Canada. So the Conservatives have been really criticizing the way that the immigration program in Canada has been run and continued to run in a certain direction for, with basically accusing the current government to just, let everybody in with no restrictions, and that eventually this has led to an increase in crime. I'm not saying that there's any correlation between the two, but it is something that they have been discussing, that it might be connected. I mean, we kind of saw a little bit of this in France back last year, where a lot of the immigrants were causing fires and having a lot of issues. And that does raise the question where in Canada, we are bringing in a lot of immigrants. So how do we make the same thing not happen in Canada? Basically, where they're accusing the immigration system of falling short is, one, prioritizing skilled immigrants, so immigrants that won't just come in and then start working in Uber, for example. And then the second one is not allowing the infrastructure to grow at the rate of immigration, which, as we've talked about, is one of the things affecting the housing crisis. All right, so on to number 5, which is considerations for the healthcare system. Now, as it stands in Canada, there's only the option for public healthcare. And as of last year, the wait time to see a specialist is 15 weeks. If you're really sick and you need a scan for cancer, you might die before getting treatment. And that is something that has been increasing a lot the last few years. The number of people that die before getting treated. That's not a very good statistic. So one of the things that the Conservative government may consider doing is finally implementing a private option in Canada for healthcare versus just relying solely on the public system, which is a little bit broken right now. Another change that they could make in the healthcare system is, instead of trying to control it all at the federal level, which is what's happening now, they may choose to delegate a bit more decision-making power to the individual provinces to help speed up decision making and allow provinces to import new technology, have their own incentives for education in the healthcare space, and hopefully just have more people that are in the healthcare system and ideally get more care to more Canadians that need it. Now, number 6, the next change that might happen in case the Conservative government comes in is the climate change considerations, or anything environmental. It's very traditional of Conservative governments to kind of put that stuff on a backseat while they try to focus on kickstarting the economy. So we've already heard the Conservative leader, Pierre, talking about how he would reopen the oil sands, build pipelines, and really just go with energy and data centers, all that kind of stuff. So the climate incentives and things about the environment might take a little bit of a backseat, and we might see a few programs get cut funding or cut out altogether in terms of climate protection. So that is something to consider as well. But one thing to think about is that the current Liberal government actually did spend $10,000 trying to catch one American bullfrog, I think in one of the parks in Alberta. So maybe I'm okay with it if the Conservative government decides to spend that $10,000 on something that will help the economy versus trying to catch a bullfrog, for example. All right, now number 7. So this is something that's a bit more kind of depends on your perspective on it, but what might change with a conservative government coming in is a bit more unity and flow between Canadians. So we do know that the current government had very divisive policies, especially during COVID-19 when they were, blaming people that don't want the vaccine and saying they're crazy and evil, and then turning around 2 years later saying they never said any of those things. So one thing that might happen is the conservative government might give more power, as mentioned before, to individual provinces to make decisions that better align with the individual culture in those provinces versus trying to control at a federal level. Another thing that might change and make the environment a bit more positive is the conservative government has talked a bit about the opportunities for young people and trying to get them to engage more in economic growth by starting their own business. So by empowering youth and focusing on education, which seems to be the focus of the new Conservative Party, we might get a new wave of optimism with the youth who at this point in time are feeling really dreary and not really very excited about the future because it's so difficult to afford not just education, not just a home, but surviving in Canada altogether right now. So that might increase people's patrioticness towards actually being Canadian versus right now, it's not really a point of pride for a lot of people. All right, so that was a lot of information, but let's summarize it. So number one of the ways that things could turn out for the better in the case of a conservative government coming in power in 2025 is at least moves steps towards better housing practices and a better housing economy in Canada. Reducing the housing crisis is ideal at this point in time for sure. Number two, try to balance the debt of the Canadian government and try to start to work towards getting that debt paid and having a bit more insight into what's actually being spent and not wasting people's tax dollars. Number three, kickstart the economy by encouraging small businesses, working out deals that can benefit everybody looking to start a business, and really encouraging young people to start their own business and kickstart the economy, getting more money flowing not just into Canada, but within Canada. Number four, reforms in Canada that could increase how healthcare operates, deals with other countries that can bring in modern technology, can really help modernize Canada and brace Canada for all that influx of people coming in and really prep for a burst of economic activity in Canada, not just within Canada, but in its relationships with other countries too. And number five, maybe they can even influence people in Canada to have a national pride and maybe bring people together, which I would love to see. So what do you think? What would you think a conservative government would do for Canada? The pros and the cons. Drop it in the comments below. We would love to hear your opinion. So if you like this information, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Drop your comments in the comments below. Would love to hear your thoughts, and see you in the next one.